Hopefully everybody can see my screen. This is the screen that you first get to when you log into the system, and it's going to list all the different clients that you've added in. And today's going to be a really open-ended session, so if you have any questions along the way, just feel free to either unmute yourself and jump in with your question, or if it's easier, you can send it through the Zoom chat. So today I'm going to be going through a spouse client file from start to finish. And we're going to start by going to this add button and adding in the first spouse. So you just go first name and last name. We'll start with Ben actually, Ben Collins. Middle name is optional. The email field is there if you want to send the client the online questionnaire. So you put in their email, you click this use questionnaire box, and then when you're ready to add them to the system, you're going to get a prompt as to how you want to send the questionnaire, either directly from eState Planner, or you can copy a special link that you can send to the client from your own email. And that way you can sort of customize the email a bit more. Then the client's going to get the email, they'll click on the link, and then they'll be prompted to create a password, just so that their information stays secure and so that they don't have to do it all in one sitting. They can come back into it. And then they go through and put in their profile, family tree, asset, and debt information. And anything they put in that online questionnaire is going to automatically populate back into your system. So it's going to save a lot of time on all the manual entry and data collection. But you don't have to send the questionnaire from eState. You can use your own questionnaire. You can collect the information live in the client meeting. You just wouldn't worry about putting in their email and don't click that use questionnaire box. And then you can just add them into the system normally. And now, since we're doing a spouse client file today, that means that we're doing wills for both spouses. And if you're doing wills for both spouses, you need to add them both as separate clients in the system and then link them together using the spouse client function. So you're going to go back to the add button. We'll add in Lauren, the spouse. And the key field here is spouse client. So this is what's going to link them together and make sure that any shared family tree information or joint asset information is going to automatically populate in both of their profiles. It's also going to allow you to sync the planning from one spouse to the other if it's going to be more of a mirror will situation. You can only do this spouse client linking when you're adding the second spouse to the system, because the first spouse needs to already be in the system in order to link them together and choose them from that drop-down list. Then you just choose who you want to start with, and you just click on their name to go into their profile. And this is how you're going to start if you haven't sent the client the questionnaire, or if you have but they haven't filled it out yet. So you're going to start with the client's icon and the spouse. And usually what I like to do first is edit the client's information. You can always tell who the client is because they're going to be surrounded in black all the time. Anyone else on the family tree, if they're selected, they'll be surrounded in blue. And usually I like to edit that client's information. So first name, last name, and gender are really the key fields for anyone on the family tree that you want to make sure filled out for the generation of the will purposes. Also known as, for the client, will populate in the will. So if Ben's also known as Benny Collins, then you can fill out that field here and it will populate in the document. Date of birth, you can just type it in. I find that easier. Let's say June 7th, 1950. And that age will automatically populate for you. Country of birth, you can do country, you can do citizenships or multiple citizenships. All this other information is good to have on your client, but not going to affect the generation of the will itself. Residency is important because the city will populate in the will. So if it's Ben Collins of the city of Toronto, that will populate. Special circumstances, this is important because if the client has any potential capacity issues, you're going to want to be marking this off and keeping good notes on this stuff in case there's a will challenge down the line. And relationships, it's just going to tell you who they're related to that you've added into the system. And it's a place where you can go and fix relationships. So if you've added maybe a child that is actually a sibling and you don't want to delete them and re-add them, you can just fix them through this relationship section here. But don't when you're just adding people to the family tree, do it over here. Don't do it in this relationship section. This is just for fixing relationships. And we'll go ahead and save. And adding through the family tree works through direct relationships. So whoever you're clicked on, whoever the circle is bolded around, is the individual that you're adding to. And then you go to the add button and select the relationship to them. So we'll say child. Whenever you're adding a child to the family tree, it'll ask you who the other parent is. If it's the current spouse, if it's a new parent, so an ex-spouse that is going to be involved in the will, or a single parent. So there might be an ex-spouse, but they're not going to be involved, or they're genuinely a single parent. Let's just say it's Lauren. Then you can enter in the child's information, John Collins, male, I'll say date of birth, July 9th, 2000. Then the special circumstances section for anyone that's not the client is a place where you can note sort of relationship difficulties, estrangement, but most importantly, disability. So if the individual is disabled, you're going to want to make sure this box is checked off so that later on, when you're trying to draft a Henson trust and you're drafting a trust that's fully discretionary to the death of the beneficiary, it's going to make sure to include the Henson trust clause in the will. So this is the trigger so that the system knows that the individual has a disability. If you want to add a grandchild to the family tree, it also works through direct relationships. So you can't just add a grandchild directly to Ben. What you'd have to do is add a child to Ben, click on the child's icon and add a child to that child. And then you'd be able to add the grandchild's information in. So we'll call her Lily Collins, female, we'll add her in. Same kind of thing for nieces and nephews. You would click on the client, add a sibling to the client, click on the sibling, add a child to the sibling. And that's how you get the nieces and nephews on the family tree. If there's going to be anyone else involved in the will that doesn't fit on the family tree, either because they're really distantly related or they're just not family, you can go to this All People tab, and it's going to list everyone you've added to the system. And it's also the place where you can add people that aren't family. So you can go to the Add button, same kind of process, you can enter their information in. Let's say Jordy's going to be a trustee later on, so we'll add him in here. And then it's going to ask you who this individual is related to. Is it related to Ben, the client? What's the relationship? Let's just say he's a friend. And then you can add him that way. So that's the people section. The next section is assets. This is where you're going to list all of your clients' assets that they've added to the system. And you're always going to start with a general personal effects because it's going to remind you to gift these personal effects in the initial gift section when we get to scenarios so that it's triggering a special disposition of personal effects clause in the will. So you don't need to value it really or anything. It's more just there to remind you to gift it. Anything else is the only assets that you need to add here are those that are going to be specific asset bequests or registered assets that you want to confirm or do new designations for in the will. But you can also just add on all your clients' assets and give them a nice sense of what's in their estate and what the value of their estate's looking like at this point in time. You just go up to the Add button. Then there's different categories and different types within the category. For any asset that you're adding in, the asset name field is the most important because that's how the asset's going to be referred to throughout the system and in the will as well. So I like to put all the identifying information there. So like RBC bank account, whatever the account number is. And that way, if I'm adding in multiple bank accounts, if they're all called bank account or bank account copy, I'm going to get confused as to which is which. But if I know this is the RBC bank account, the other is the CIB savings account, then I can sort of differentiate and be able to make sure I'm planning for the correct asset. You don't have to put a balance or a value in, but it's going to make the graphic summary look a lot nicer, and it will also automatically calculate that probate tax for you. Next, let's go for a home. So again, you can change the name. Maybe it's the family home if they have multiple homes. The address field, if you're going to get this as a specific asset request in the will, the address field will populate. Current value, let's say it's $1 million. You have this mortgage/encumbrances field, and if there is a mortgage on the property, you're going to want to put the value of that mortgage in this field here, because not only is it good to know what asset the debt is associated with, but also it affects how much probate tax is calculated on this asset. So we're going to get to the next section, debts, and there's also an opportunity to add a mortgage in there. But if you're adding it in here, don't add it in again on the debt section because it will double count it. So best practice is just ignore it, don't put it on the debts tab, and put it on the assets tab if it's associated with the specific asset. But just make sure you're not putting it in both places because it will double count it. Ownership, you can do joint, tenants in common. Let's say it's joint, and you can pick who the other joint owner is. And let's do one more. We'll go for an RRSP. So again, I like to put that identifying information, the RBC, RRSP, whatever the number is. Beneficiary, this is just whoever the current beneficiary is on the policy, and it's just for information purposes, for the purposes of the profile summary. So you're going to be able to decide whether you want to change or confirm this beneficiary in the will later on. Current value, say 100,000. So the probate tax always automatically calculates, but the income tax doesn't. And this is just due to the variability of different clients' tax bracket. So if we want to put in an income tax number just to show clients sort of the highest possible tax they're looking at, for something like an RRSP, we put in like 50% of it. For something like an asset with a capital gain, we do like 25% of that gain. And then you're showing clients sort of just an estimate of the taxes that they could be looking at. Yes, so the recording of the session will be sent out on Friday, and yes, you will get a copy of it. So the next section is debts. So this is really more for planning, and you can just go to the add debt. It's not going to affect anything in the actual will itself. We're not going to put in a mortgage because we already did on the assets tab, but we can put in a credit card. Let's say it's just $5,000, just to give them a sense of what they're looking at, more accurate value of their estate at this point in time. Then you get to scenarios, and this is really the key part of the system. It's where all of the planning occurs. And the idea is that depending on your client's situation, you go through each one of these 3 scenarios and you create a plan so that you're covering your bases no matter what ultimately ends up happening. So you start with surviving spouse. So this is the plan where the spouse is still alive, where the client's passed away. Then you go to descendants only. So both the spouse and the client are gone, but there's kids or grandkids around. And then lastly, no descendants. So this is everyone's gone, ultimate disaster, what's happening. So you just click into a scenario to go into it. And there's kind of 2 ways you can go about doing this planning. You can do it manually by going through each of these sections yourself. So there's 3 sections. There's the joint designated asset, which is where you're going to put anything that's joint or designated to another individual to show that it's falling outside of the estate. Initial gifts is where you're going to create specific asset bequests or cash legacies. And then the balance of the estate, this is how you're going to divide up the residue, either by adding segments and gifts within the segments or by running a macro. And macro is just it's just a faster way to divide up the residue if it's a common scenario. And that meets one of our sort of pre-populated residue breakdowns, like everything to spouse or everything to children. Adding segments and gifts within the segment, or if it's more complicated, if you're giving different percentages to different people, if you're breaking it down further, then you would use that and you would do it manually. So that's one way to do it. A faster way to do it, if it's a more typical situation overall, the whole plan, is this little lightning bolt in the top corner that we call ePlans. And so these are basically like giant macros that go through each of the scenarios and appointment sections for you and create a plan depending on which one you choose. And the nice thing about these is it'll give you a starting point. So even if it's not the exact plan you want to create, you can run it and then you can go into each scenario individually and make any changes that you want so that it matches the plan that you wanted to create. So I'm going to run this spouse with younger children, two distribution trustee plan. So I'm still in the surviving spouse. It's showing me that in the joint designated assets section, the RRSP and the family home are going to Lauren, so it's falling outside of the estate. Initial gifts, it's gifted those general personal effects to Lauren because it's going to trigger that special disposition of personal effects clause in the will. And the balance of the estate, I can click right on that gray bar that says segment 1 and then click on it again. It's going to show me the details. It's going to Lauren, absolute 100%. There's no gift over because that second scenario, descendants only, that will be our gift over. So I don't need to put anything here. So this scenario looks good to me. I don't need to make any changes. So I can go ahead and move to the next scenario. Descendants only. So here, nothing that's joint or designated. Initial gifts, it's now got the general personal effects going to the children. Let me just show you how you do it manually if you needed to. So for any specific asset request, they're going to appear as these green boxes, all the assets that you've added to the system. And what you're just going to do is drag and drop it over. Then you choose your beneficiary. So you can do people, classes, or charities. I'm going to do the class of children. Whenever you're gifting the personal effects to more than one person, you can decide on the distribution method. So you can do multiple, you can choose one. I'm just going to pick trustee's discretion. Then you've got your balance of estate. So again, if I want to see the details, I'm just going to click on the gray bar and click on it again. It's showing me it's going to the children in the trust, 100%. Same trustees as executors. The duration is when the beneficiary reaches age 30, but I want to change it to 25. Mandatory payments, I want to change this as well. So I want to say at 21, they get 25%. Unlimited discretion, gift over to beneficiaries issue, then to the other class members, so the other children. So now I'll save this. And so now I've worked off the E-plan, so I didn't have to start from scratch, but I've ultimately created the plan that I wanted to create with the details that my client wanted. It just saved me some time. And this sync button up in the top corner, this is going to copy everything I've done in the descendants only scenario over to Lauren. So it's going to copy the residue breakdown, anything that's joined. It's just not going to copy solely owned assets because Ben's solely owned assets that he's giving away aren't Lauren's anyways. So we'll just click on sync, and then this is going to copy over to Lauren's. So when I'm going through Lauren's after, I don't have to start from scratch with her since she had pretty much the same plan. Then we'll go to the last one, no descendants. Maybe I have a really big family. I don't think it's ever going to get to this point. I could clear it and not even plan for this scenario. But let's say I do want to create a plan. I want to give half to a charity and half to Jordy. So let's start by adding our segment. So we're going to start for segment 1 for 50%. Now I have to specify what's happening with this 50%. And I do that by adding a gift. It's going to go to Jordy. Absolute 100%. This means 100% of the 50% is going to Jordy. So I don't want to divide up that 50% segment even further. And we can put a gift over into his issue, and then we'll add. So now looking at the green circles of this outer 50%, I've dealt with 100% of it. So I don't need to add any more gifts here. What I need to do is go back to segment so I can add my second segment and deal with the other 50%. I'll add a gift. This time I'm going to do a charity. And if you search in the search bar, it's going to search the CRA database for you so that when you choose the correct one, it's going to have the CRA number and everything already associated with it that will populate in the will. It's going to be absolute, and we'll just add it in. So now I've dealt with everything here, and I can sync it over to Lauren as well, if she would want the same plan in hers. That's scenarios. Then we'll go to appointments. So this is where you're going to appoint your estate trustees or your guardians if you need to. Because we ran that e-plan, it's already made Lauren the primary estate trustee, but we could add more people in by just going this add button. You can do people or trust corporations, and their specific trust clauses will populate in the will. We're going to choose, let's say, Jordy. And then the condition is the key here. So if you have none, that will make them a primary. If you put a condition, it'll make them an alternate. And usually the condition I use is if all specified cannot act, and make sure the name on the specified line is correct, and then I'll add. I can do the same thing for a further alternate. I'll pick John if all specified cannot act, but I'm going to change the specified to Jordy. So now he's going to be Lauren if Lauren can't act, Jordy if Jordy can't act, John. And I can sync this over to Lauren up in the top corner. So that's appointments. Then the last thing we're going to review today is provisions. So there's a couple of things here. The first is funeral arrangements. So if you want those in the will, you can just type them on the line. If not, you can get rid of this text and there won't be any body disposition clause in the will. Is there a point in the software where you need to specify whether a professional trustee needs to sign a fees agreement? I think it might automatically populate in the powers section when you generate the will. So I don't think you need to specify it in the system. Unless you want to set out a specific compensation agreement in the will, then you can do that by going to compensation, and instead of court's discretion, you could say fixed by agreement or fixed in document.
Am I able to ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry to interrupt. It's very helpful. When you're dealing with, somebody who doesn't have an executor located in Canada or the province, and you're thinking of using a bank, I've been told by certain banks that they want to see a copy of the will and sign a fees agreement. So I'm wondering if your software has a fee agreement from different banks in it, and you're supposed to be taking that to the bank shortly after or before executing the will?
We don't have like a fee agreement that you could generate.
Okay.
But if you choose a specific trust company as one of the things, then their specific powers will populate in the will. But I think
Okay.
you would still need to just work out that fee agreement with them.
Sure. Thank you.
No problem. The second thing on the provisions tab is this include future members. And so this is if you're using class skips in the will and you want to include future members of the class. So it's only going to apply if you're using that class in the will. So on the second scenario, we use the class of children. So if I check this box, then it's going to define children in the will as John Collins and any other child born to or adopted by me and my spouse. Class restrictions, you can restrict certain members of being part of a class. Trust for beneficiaries under a certain age. This is a general trust clause that's going to guide underage beneficiaries that you haven't set up specific trusts for. Loan forgiveness is if you want to forgive any loans from specific people. And then secondary will assets, this is only if you're doing multiple wills, so primary and secondary. Then you can pick and choose included in the secondary will. So if you're just doing a single will, you don't need to worry about checking or unchecking anything. This is only if you're doing multiple wills. Then up here, this little exclamation point in the circle, these are what we call advisor insights. So it's basically like contextual alerts to make sure that you haven't missed putting anything in the system, or that you've thought about certain planning things that could come along with the information or how you've set up specific things in the system. So it's just kind of advising you on certain things, and it's a nice resource to double check to make sure you can be more confident in your plan. Beside this is just notes. You can make any notes on your client here. And then the last button is the generation button. So this is where you're going to generate your documents and your summaries. So there's 3 summaries. There's the profile, which is going to give you all the information that the clients filled out in the questionnaire or that you filled out for them. So it's got all of the people, all the profile, all the people on the family tree, assets, and debts as well. So it's just got all the details. You can give it to the client after the initial meeting so that they can sort of check over names, spellings, and asset details and make sure everything's correct. Then you've got the graphic scenario summary. This is a nice visual representation of the will for each of the scenarios, and it's going to give you a better sense of what's going where, and if you're putting in those asset values on the assets tab, it's going to look a lot nicer and give you a sense of how much is in the estate at this point in time. And then you've got the last one, the text scenario summary. So it's going to give you all the information that you've put in the system. So who are the trustees, how you've divided everything up, what's falling outside of the estate, what gifts have been created, basically the will without the legalese. So those are the three summaries. Then you've got documents. So these are all the documents you can generate. Today we're going to do single will. For the signing date, you can change it, you can keep it as is, or you can take it out and put it in the will later. Registered asset designation is if you want to confirm or do a new designation for the registered assets in the will. Joint designated asset confirmation is basically a clause that says anything that's joint is truly intended to be joint, not held on a resulting trust. Counterpart is if you're signing a counterpart. Simplified is a shorter will with less definitions and powers. The will guide is a nice guide to the different clauses that's at the end of the will. A cover page is a cover page. And then you can choose your witnesses and you can decide if you're going to generate your affidavits of execution as well. And then it's going to spit out a will. It's a Word document. It's fully editable. You can make any changes that you want. I'll just go through it briefly. So this funds and plans is if you click the registered asset box. Assets passing outside of the will, so if you click the joint asset box. These are definitions. My children means John and any other child born to or adopted by, because we clicked the future children box on the provisions tab. Here's our executors, Lauren, if not Lauren, Jordy, if not Jordy, John. Here's the funeral arrangement. Here's the special disposition of personal effects clause that generates when you gift those general personal effects as an initial gift in the scenario section. And then the residue. To Lauren, if not to Lauren, this trust for the children. And then ultimately, half to Jordy, half to Epilepsy Toronto. And then if we scroll all the way down, we're going to get to our nice little will guide that guides to the different clauses in the will. So that's how you would go through it. One other thing I want to point out before we wrap up is this little question mark box up in the top corner. So if you click on it, it's going to bring you right over to our help desk. It's got lots of different things on how to do, lots of different articles on how to do everything in the system. And it's also got courses, specifically the eState Planner Certification course. And this is sort of a self-paced course. It's free, and it will take you through everything you need to know to plan a will with eState Planner. So it'll go through also all the different sections in more depth. And so I'd recommend sort of checking this out if you're trying to get to learn the system better. But that about wraps it up for today. Is there any final questions before we go?
No, thank you so much.
No problem. And don't hesitate to reach out if you do have any questions along the way.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.